Kevin Liston.
And I'm Joshua Crocker.
And this is Kicking for a Living,
a podcast about martial arts and business from two martial arts instructors.
Oh, is that what we are?
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Oh, man. I sometimes forget these things.
Today, I think that we're going to look at a little bit of what our jobs as instructors are. And you're going to get some live behind the scenes because Kevin's going to be giving me one of my instructor evaluations today.
Dun, dun, dun.
He is my boss, so he's got to grade my work today. And then, even harder, I'm going to have to do the same to him. I didn't plan for that, so I'm just going to, start ripping you on everything you do.
Oh, please do. We kind of mentioned a little behind the scenes that people may not even think about. Like, being a teacher and teaching a class is something that takes training and time, and it's not easy to do. And so I think it'd be interesting for everyone to kind of see how that works, and it'd be good for you to do it to me as well, because sometimes as the quote head instructor, I don't like term head instructor and boss, but I don't always get that. I always ask for feedback, but it's hard. Who's gonna tell their quote boss, like, oh, you suck at this?
Well, it's hard because most things I learned about teaching are from you, so just finding something to critique you on is not easy. I remember even just in martial arts, I was teaching a class earlier in the year, and I actually corrected you on something, and I was like, is that the first time I've actually corrected Kevin or been able to give him a bonus piece on something? So that was cool.
Always. I'm always looking for feedback. I'm always looking to improve, and I want everyone else. And I'm going to segue just a little bit into something you said, because you said he's my boss, and this is a conversation I've had recently with the other owners, talking about a boss versus a leader. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when we're talking about instructor evaluations and teaching a class, you really want to be a leader. I don't want to be a boss. And when you're in front of a class, you don't want to come across as a boss. I'm sure everyone's seen the memes where, a boss tells, a leader leads. A boss says, do this, a leader shows them why this needs to be done. A boss sits on the throne and gets pulled. A leader goes out there and is pulling with everybody else. And it's just interesting that you brought that up, and I never want to view myself as a boss. So if I ever come across as a boss, please let me know. Feel free to say it.
I just say that because that's the more recognizable word.
Right. I get that. But seriously.
It doesn't feel that way. It feels like a team, and then, you're the one kind of leading the instructors. And you bring up the difference between, head instructors, assistant instructors, all these names. And I think it's more just kind of the responsibility. Is we're both lead instructors, which just essentially means it's our job to teach more classes and handle more of the off-the-mat jobs. Mm-hmm. But we have several other instructors as well who could teach a great class, or they have a specific class that they're the lead instructor of. But we're the lead instructors over our main programs at our school.
And really, at the end of the day, we're lead instructors simply because we've done it longer. That at the end of the day, that's really all it is. The students, most of the students that are instructors were once students under us. I really like that concept. And so they've seen us, they just haven't actually taught the class as much. And that's really the main difference. Once you do it enough, you kind of just pick it up, and you see what works, you see what doesn't, you get feedback, and then you improve and build from there. But really the main difference is we just have done it more and we do it more. So we just kind of naturally evolve into that.
And one thing I've talked about recently as we've had some new instructors training is just the difference in teaching versus knowing the skills. One of the easier classes to teach, at least when you're starting, is an advanced class. Because we're going to assume if you're the instructor, you're a black belt, you've already passed all the tests. So you're fresh on the advanced material, you have great students. It's not that hard of a class to teach. But on the flip side, the Little Ninjas class, our 4 through 6-year-old class, is probably the hardest class to teach when you're starting. It's the easiest skills, but it's the youngest group. So being able to teach skills at that level, that's a lot harder. And I always say if you want to become a good instructor, you need to teach the little kids class. Even if you don't plan on teaching it forever, it's a great kind of training ground. It's almost like your basic class of teaching.
And it's funny, and I'm going to ask you this question because I want to see if you agree or disagree or what your opinion is. But would you say that over time, as you get better at teaching, that it's actually easier to teach the Little Ninjas class than the advanced class?
Yeah, I think this is when you're starting. It flips when you get good, because this was another conversation I had this week. Teaching the advanced class now for me, after teaching for a couple of years, is the harder one, because I feel like I've got to elevate the teaching in that class. So I've got to be really good now, because it starts getting more abstract into the concepts you have to teach. You have to be a lot better at teaching to a diverse group of people who are at all different points of skill, control, size, age. Mm-hmm. The good thing about Little Ninja classes or beginner classes is everyone's kind of on the same level. But as it gets higher, everyone starts to branch off more, and the concepts just get a lot more, again, I think abstract's a good way to put it, because it's not as simple as do the moves in this order, here's how the move works. It's more, how do we apply this now? And that is hard. That's the next level to teaching once you've got kind of your foundation down, I find.
Right, and I agree, and that's why I was kind of asking, because yes, at first teaching advanced seems easier because the general focus of the class, for the most part, is better, and so you just are teaching the technique. And then, when you teach a 4, 5, 6-year-old class, what we call Little Ninjas, it's, how do I keep them engaged? How do I keep them engaged? Once you get really good at teaching, keeping them engaged kind of becomes almost natural a little bit, and they're very excited, they're very loud, but the expectation is they're young, they're new, they're not going to get it. Whereas an advanced student, the expectation is you should get it, and then when they don't, it's like, why are you not? And it becomes harder. Especially when our advanced class generally is minimum age 10, minimum, usually not counting the adult classes, to 15, maybe 16 on the high end. There's a few adults in there. Well, like you said, the size difference between some of these, like a 10 or 11-year-old versus a 14, 15, can be drastic. A 4, 5, and 6-year-old, the height difference is going to be 6 inches at most. I guess a foot on the long end. But they're all the same. They're all very similar. So it becomes a lot easier, like you said, to manage that.
And yeah, it is. There's two different kinds of teaching. It's that young kid beginner level, and then the older and teen and adult level. And this week, it was Tuesday, I taught 2 classes. One was the Little Ninja 4 through 6-year-old class, and one was the adult class. So it is, even that day, I pretty much flip between the two extremes of teaching, and I feel like at this point it's not that hard. And I think I've started to see more in common with those levels is I think adults just don't realize as much that they need to be taught like Little Ninjas. And that goes for us too. Sometimes we don't realize that you have to teach those classes a lot more like you do the little kid class, because they also want to have fun, they want to be engaged. So I think I found more over time that teaching every class, kind of like you would even a Little Ninja class, is important. And that's why I say when you're starting, that's a great place to be. It's not going to be easy at first, but it gives you the basic skills of teaching a class and class management that carries through all levels and all ages.
And that's why I think it's important to be able to teach both and learn that concept, because when we're talking about like an instructor evaluation, this is not evaluating so much the technique. Like, that is a very small part of it. So an instructor evaluation is, how are you presenting the information? Are they learning the information? Are they engaged in the information? Are you managing the expectations of the class? And really, like you said, at the end of the day, it is the same. Teaching a Little Ninjas, teaching an adult. In fact, I've actually started branching the two. I've realized that I've started talking to the little kids more like they're adults, and then I've started being goofy and silly with the adults because they enjoy it.
Teaching an adult class at first can be a little intimidating, but yeah, once you realize that, and I want to talk about this more soon, I think we will, but for an adult who's, especially if they started martial arts as an adult, I think there's a part of them that's a place where they can be a kid again. Because a lot of adults, it's something they wanted to do as a kid. Now they're out there, they get to punch and kick things, they get to be around, their family or friends here. And I think it's a place where, they like to be a little bit more goofy and have fun.
A large portion of adults at our school, and probably most schools that are doing it, are because they wanted to do it as a kid and couldn't. Or they did it very briefly and miss it. That is a huge part of our adult class. I think we kind of did like a little mini survey on that, and we determined that over 50%, I think it was like 70%-ish, of the adults on our mat wanted to do it as a kid, had someone they knew that did it when they were a kid, and did it themselves when they were a kid. They had some connection already or desire that brought them back in. Very few adults decide, as an adult, I want to do martial arts now. It was always they wanted to do it, knew someone that did it. There was something else that connected them to it before that as an adult they wanted to go back to. I think that's really neat too. I think that's kind of cool.
So we've been rambling quite a while now. You want to go ahead and get into my evaluation? I think they can hear my nerves shaking over here.
So I'll ease their nerves. This is actually an evaluation that I've already done. But we're going to kind of revisit it so you guys can see how an evaluation goes. This is now what'd be interesting is that you've never evaluated me, so that'd be more on the fly, and that'd be a little bit newer in this. But just kind of a brief overview, when I do an evaluation, this is me. This is not all schools. This is our school. I kind of break it down into things. Number one, class structure. So we start off with a warm-up, and I evaluate the warm-up. Then we have something called the mat chat. This is where we gather the students in. We kind of talk about what's going on, the expectations, what we're talking about that week. That's kind of the life skill moment, focus or investing in yourself. Or this month we've been talking about creativity. Afterwards, then I get into really the nuts and bolts where I evaluate the technique that's being taught, what is actually being taught in that class. And then the last kind of major pieces are the quality of instruction. How good is the actual instruction? There's going to be a lot of acronyms that I'm going to throw out, and so I'll try to quickly explain those so there's not confusion on that. But the way I evaluate is in threefold. Meets expectations means you are where you need to be. Needs improvement, obviously that means this is something you need to work on or improve on. And exceeds expectations, meaning you did this great. This is something you're naturally good at, or you exceeded where you want to be. To let everyone know, this is the same grading mechanism, those three, that we use on all of our students when they test. You meet expectations, need improvement, or exceed the expectations. So, starting with the warm-up is kind of broken down into engagement. How engaged are you and the students? Your leadership skills and setting the example yourself, and time management. Probably the hardest one for most new instructors. On all of these, you met the expectations. Your engagement is always good. You actually have some very diverse warm-ups. I tend to be a little more static in my warm-ups. Yours are a lot more diverse, which helps engagement. Your leadership and setting the example is always good. You have this benefit of still being young enough to do the warm-up with them.
There's some days it's a little bit harder. Like, you can see the days where I'm not jumping as high as others. But yeah, overall, it's fine.
Yeah. You'll the older I get it, that there are sometimes an instructor will not do the warm-up with them, but make sure you're still moving around, holding bags, setting goals. But you always meet that, and your time management was fine. You did the warm-up in a few minutes. You didn't overextend because then it eats into class time. So overall, your warm-up, you're exactly where you need to be. And then we go into the mat chat. So gather them in, talking about whatever that life skill or focus is that week. So this is broken down, again, into engagement. But really, this is, are the students engaged with you? It's really hard I think this was a basics class. So this is 7 and up, new students. It's hard when you're talking to keep a 7 or 8 year old's attention when you're just talking and not having them actively do things. So you have to make sure that you're engaging the students and they're engaging you. They're focused. You have to make sure that the topic discussion is on point. Are you actually staying on the topic of that mat chat and not going off on a tangent? And then again, time management. We have one instructor here, I won't say their name, you and I both know who it is, who has a tendency to ramble on a little bit and extend those mat chats a little bit.
It's me. No, I don't think you were talking about me. But
no, I wasn't.
It is sometimes, and if it's a really good mat chat and I can see it's important, I'll let it take more of class time. But that's more common in the older classes, advanced or adult, and it's still rare. But sometimes we'll get so deep in a conversation, I'm like, it's okay to keep going for a few more minutes, just because this is valuable things to talk about.
And I think on those, because we talked about engagement, that time management and engagement might even kind of flip, because if the time goes over in an attempt to really engage them, that's fine. That's maybe even a good thing. And overall, on all three of these, again, you met the expectations. You did very good. You had a good mat chat. I think the only note that I had was work on something called pacing and peaking. What pacing and peaking is sometimes when you're a little more serious, your voice gets a little more serious, you get lower. And then when you want them to be excited, your voice gets louder and you get more animated and things like that. And that's pacing and peaking. That's an engagement tool as well. And again, you met the expectations. But I always try to make notes of, hey, this is something that you could work on. It didn't really need improvement. You do just fine, but this might help you exceed. The other reason I said that was because we have 2 mat spaces at our dojo, and sometimes the noise from one can carry over. If that class is being really loud and excited, you have to kind of pace and peak to make sure that your noise levels are appropriate. Kids can get distracted when they hear the other class going on and they're really loud. Or whenever they hear birds outside on the roof and I have to constantly, pull their attention back in. Or dripping from all kinds of ways that a kid could get distracted. So.
Oh, I think... Maybe I'm misremembering this, but once I was teaching class, you weren't there for that, and I had one of our new instructors teach a drill, and as she was doing it, our neighbors next door, just loud construction noises during the little ninja class, and I felt so bad for her, because she was still really new to teaching the little kids, and it was just, they were clearly so distracted by that. I had to move the whole class back to the other side of the mat, just to keep them away from it.
Oh, yeah,
for her.
That's very, very hard to do.
But it's more, just especially when we have 2 classes going on. If one's really excited, you gotta make sure that's not a distraction.
And because this is something that I would say during an evaluation, if something like that did come up, where there was a lot of noise distraction, like construction, I would say use that to engage the students. I do this a lot. Where if there's a lot of noise or something going on, or if there's power flashes, I say, oh my gosh, the power's flickering in and out. That's called karma or fate or the world or whatever trying to distract you. Don't let it happen. This is your test. You're being tested on your focus right now because I've got an instructor over there flipping the lights off. When all reality... there's maybe a lightning storm that's causing power, or they're doing construction that's causing noise. I just challenge the kids and tell them it's a test. Usually that helps engage, and I can keep things going. So that would be a good, in that situation, evaluation tool that I would use to help my instructors out. Then we move on to the technique that's actually being taught, or techniques. So if we're focusing on kicks or punches or wrist releases or choke defenses or ground defense weak or whatever the case may be, this breaks down into knowledge of the technique, followed the SPF, which is Slice Presentation Formula. Basically, it's a very simple way to present the information. Show them the move, then explain the move. The lower the ranks, the quicker that goes. The higher the ranks, the more you can go into detail, but kind of following that general guideline. Following the actual curriculum, so making sure you're on topic and you're not going too far off the rails. Time management, as always, that's a big one. And then addressing concerns and improvements on the techniques. If the students are struggling with this concept, how do you address it and improve it? Again, on all these, met expectations. Yeah. When you asked me to do an evaluation, I'm realizing exactly how boring this is to listeners because you're meeting everything, because you are a good instructor, that there's not a lot of like...
But it's a good chance to kind of break down each of the pieces that we are looking for, and that as a student, you're so focused on what we're teaching you, you're not thinking about, oh, are they actually a good teacher? Well, I'd hope you wouldn't be thinking about that, because that probably means we're messing up. But yeah, we have a whole study and class and all these things just dedicated to what the things we need to do to teach a good class.
And all that, I think that for those who are listening, who are maybe looking to get into martial arts, we've always said, and I've always said, go to multiple schools, because if you go to one school and your kid has fun, great. But your kid can still have fun even if it's a bad teacher. And you probably won't notice that for a while. And so there is a big difference between good instructors and bad, just like in school, good teachers and bad teachers. And so knowing that and making sure that the staff, that school, takes the time to try to kind of vet those instructors, I think is very missed. It's not something we consider. We think, oh, they're a really good martial artist, so therefore I want to learn from them. Well, if they can't convey everything, it doesn't do much good. In this case, I mean, you did everything fine. You obviously know the techniques and you know what we're teaching, and you know what to teach and you know how to teach it. Your time management is also very good as well. And in fact, on that, you did great. But I will bring up that time management is, I would say, the most consistent thing that most teachers need improvement on. And that is they get too down a rabbit hole on one technique, or they underestimate how much time it takes for students to really do a technique. And then even 2 minutes can start running over, and that gets crowded, and especially with kids, parents have things to do, they have busy schedules, and a class going 5 minutes over here can throw so much off. Going 1 or 2 throws it off, going 5... And so
I've seen the opposite too, where it can be easy to go under time and you're left with time left and you're like, I don't know what to do with this remaining time. And sometimes that's where you try to add in something extra and then you go over, and it's just kind of a compounding issue in both directions.
Yeah, I've got 3 minutes left, let me throw in this new technique. And so you show them the technique and it took 4 minutes. And so then you realize, well, I'm already over time and they haven't drilled it. Yes, that does happen. But this is really the point where I just make sure that you're conveying the information and you know what you're doing. Again, you actually got to know the technique. You have to know what you're doing in order to teach someone, because they're going to ask questions, which is actually in the next category, or there's going to be improvements that they need made on the technique, recognizing those, improving it without tearing the student down, for example. But all that met expectations on. So we're good on all that. And then we go into the last and the biggest category, which is quality of instruction. This is obviously the biggest category, as this is an instructor evaluation. So this goes into addressing questions, using the student's name. That is an entire category in itself, because you've got to know who your students are. The overall tone, is this a high tone, a low tone, a positive tone, a negative tone, a neutral tone? There's many reasons why you might want different tones. AADP, this is something I created. It stands for aware, acknowledge, discipline, and praise. This is essentially how I deal with a student that may need disciplinary action. That's a whole concept in itself, but I want to at least give you the acronym. Pacing and peaking, I already kind of talked about that. One and done, this is give one piece and move on. Don't overload their brain. Hit, highlight, inspire, teach. Kind of how you help a student out. You highlight them, you inspire them to learn, and then you teach them the piece that you want them to learn. Engagement, making sure you're engaged with the students, they're engaged with you. That's in multiple categories. And then the overall student experience. At the end of my evaluations, I pick students at random, go around, and I literally ask them to grade your class on a scale of 1 to 10. I say, hey, how did you feel about this? If on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst class in the world and you hated it, and 10 being the best class you've ever taken. And you'd be surprised how many 10, and then you'll get that random 3. And you're like, really, a 3? Why? Oh, I've already mastered this technique because I've done it once before. A true thing that happens multiple times. So that was kind of the long-winded of it, but those categories. This is the only time when you got something outside of a meets expectations. Most of these met. So I'll start with the one thing that I had as a needs improvement, and that was not the whole thing, but a piece of it, and that was the tone, the overall tone. You had a good tone of the class, but I wanted more callbacks, meaning that I wanted the students to call back more. So if you're counting one, or one, sir, ready stance, yeah, push-ups with me, 1, 2. They're counting back, they're calling back, they're saying the moves out loud. It's an engagement tool. It also activates their brain, because if they do the move, say the move at the same time, they're engaging multiple senses, they're more likely to remember it. So having them do more callbacks, which after this evaluation you have been much more diligent on. So you've been working on that's exactly why we do it. And I think the note I said was have them call back to keep them on the same page without having to watch all the others. If you can hear them calling back, you don't have to be visually like, hey, that person didn't do it. If the class is very quiet. There are some days that there are classes that are just quiet and it drives us crazy. And it's usually that Tuesday class. That Tuesday intermediate class tends to be kind of lethargic.
It can be sometimes Saturday mornings when they're sleepy. Yep. I think this is when that evaluation took place.
Yeah, and sometimes Saturdays because they're in the daytime. But then again, sometimes Saturday, I don't know.
Sometimes
Saturdays
it's
are
the
weird.
opposite, though, yeah.
So that was the only thing on the whole thing that I had a need improvement on. But there are 2 things that had an exceeds. One was using students' names. And I'll even admit, you're way better at this than I am. Using their names. You use students' names, and you make it a point to use their names. And then the last one was the student experience. The students overall, I think I asked 8, gave your class an 8.75 out of 10. Well, overall, really, really high scores. I think it was pretty much most of them were 9. Most of the students are hesitant to give a 10, which I appreciate because that means they're actually taking it serious. So several 9s and an 8. I don't think you got anything lower. I think maybe you got a 7.5 on that, but the overall was 8. So the students loved your class. They did. They enjoyed it, which is why all those high ranks wanted to kick you.
Yep.
Yeah, see? So you did that. That's your own fault. But overall, this would be a very good meets or exceeds expectations. You had one thing that needed improvement, 2 things that exceeded 2, and then the rest was exactly where they needed to be. And it's only improving from there, which means my standards would have to go up on that. So, very good job. Nice work, Joshua.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work on that.
So yeah, I'm going to have to grade you again on the expectation for you because it's definitely higher. You're the one who wrote this grading sheet, so you would hope that you're at least aware enough to be working at all of these.
Yeah, I would hope, but even for me, it's hard to work on all those at the same time.
Let's see. Class structure for the warm-up. Again, I think you meet expectations on all this. Engagement there. I think you're always setting the example. You say you're older, but, I think you're either too stubborn or still too fit to not participate fully. And time management's fine. Your warm-ups are pretty quick, but they get the job done. But then we get on to mat chat. I'd say this is probably meet expectations as well. Engagement's good. Students tend to listen to you, respond to what you're saying. The discussion's always good. Time management's good. One thing I'd bring up, because I think I'm working on this as well at the moment as we introduce some new ideas into our classes, with topic discussions and mat chats, gearing that a bit more to whatever special topic we got going on, or if we got a campaign we're leading up towards. And then also, further than the mat chat, tying that into the rest of your class. I feel like that's a more advanced teaching skill that you and I are probably best equipped to start experimenting with more in classes. And that's been something I've really been working on in my classes.
Sorry.
To varying levels of success. Sometimes it goes great, sometimes it's a little clunky. But I'd say trying to establish your mat chat and tie it more into the rest of your class would be a good thing for you to try doing.
I agree, because I think I mentioned I tend to, once I kind of find my groove, keep going with that groove. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But as we're doing these new topics, I need to be able to adjust it.
I think that's one of the interesting things, the difference between the two of us, is your teaching style does seem to be a bit more consistent, which means you make less mistakes, and you kind of know what to expect. Where I'm more likely to try new things or experiment with things, which sometimes lead to classes being a little more wonky, and I'll learn like, okay, that didn't work very well. Other times, though, it'll be great, and that's why I think sometimes I can really have students engaged even more. It's because I'm trying new things, but again, it's got its ups and downs.
Well, if you never try new things, we'll never know if new things work. So I appreciate that.
All right, techniques being taught. I'll give you an exceeds on knowledge of technique just because, you wrote our curriculum with help from others. But if I ever don't know what to do, you're the person I go to. You know all the techniques. You know all the little tips. It's hard to correct you on techniques just because you do know each detail and you practice them quite a bit. And you know all the things that need to be taught. And I think going off that, everything else would meet expectations. You follow the slice presentation formula we talked about. You follow that curriculum. Your time management's pretty good. And you address concerns, improvements in a timely manner, and you don't let it derail the class. If a student's being too silly, you're pretty quick about putting an end to that. The only thing I would bring up here on the other side is just with SPF, you, again, with that more consistent teaching style, will sometimes talk a little bit longer, keep going. But I think you're really good at knowing the class you're in. Because if it is a class where you feel like you're going to lose their attention, I don't see you just having them sit there and listen to you as much. Where it's more common in the older classes where you don't have a problem, really breaking down the move, even if it takes a few minutes. So I think you find a pretty good medium, though, and are good at knowing what that class needs.
Fair point. Thank you.
Then quality of instruction. Let's just go down this real quick. Address questions, meet expectations, use student's name, meet expectations. You tend to know the students pretty well. You may not use their names as much, but I think you know most of their names just as well as me. And it really is, it has to be ingrained in you just to constantly use people's names. And I think I use people's names so much because that's how I remember them. So, but I think you meet expectations on that. Overall tone's good, and jumping down to pacing and peaking, that's also pretty good. I feel like I sometimes think that you're a bit more consistent tone just because the way you talk, off the mats can sometimes be a bit more calm. I think you just in general have a bit more calm demeanor, but when you're in presentation mode, you're really good at that pacing and peaking and callback and keeping the tone of class well. AADP's good. The aware, acknowledge, discipline, praise. Good at disciplining students. And one thing that you always talk about, and I think could even make this an exceeds expectations, is how whenever you do discipline a student, they always end up leaving with a smile still. And the students you discipline end up being even closer to you because you have a way of being serious with them, but also building them up at the same time where they don't feel like they're just getting in trouble. They feel like you're helping them grow. And I think that is a great thing with that.
Yeah, and that came unexpectedly. I thought that student would be mad at me because I'm like, man, I had to give that student so many push-ups or squats or or whatever throughout the class. I feel like they're mad at me, and then they give me a hug. I just didn't expect it.
One and done. You're usually not too overwhelming. I feel like you're one of the better people I see at just kind of, again, getting to the point and addressing things one at a time. And I think whenever I work with you on techniques, that's something I appreciate, where it doesn't feel like whenever you come around to watch me do something, you're always going to be correcting me. You seem to look for the things that someone's doing well, and if you feel there's a simple piece they can add in, you do that. But you don't overwhelm them. You don't correct everything at once. And going off of that with the highlight, inspire, teach, I never feel like you're correcting or teaching me when we're on the mats. It always, or sorry, let me rephrase that. I feel like you're teaching me, but I never feel like I'm being corrected. With other instructors, there's been times where I'm like, oh, they're over here again. They're just going to get on to me and tell me everything I'm doing wrong with the move as I'm learning it. But I've never felt like when you come over to teach that I'm doing something wrong. You have a way of presenting the information very tactfully and very gracefully that it makes me want to be better and helps me learn the move without feeling like I'm failing at the moment. So I'd give that even an exceeds expectations. Me included, I don't think I've seen anyone else quite have a handle on that to your level. And then finally, engagement, student experience are probably both meet expectations. I didn't get to go around and ask students to rate your class since we kind of did this on the fly. But just in general, I know you tend to be students' favorite instructor or one of their favorites, and that's just because you're in front of them more. You and I tend to be the favorites just because we teach more classes. But I know students really like you, and then you could ask, I'd say 100% of the people here, they'd still go have a conversation with you if they needed something. So, yeah, that'd be my evaluation. I don't think I had a needs improvement, just a few comments and maybe suggestions, partly because they're things I'm working on as well that I noticed you can also work on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It feels like it's hard to do that, but really it's not. It's just a comfort level and a confidence level. I mean, I would say, I would actually say myself, for my position, I would actually say that using the name is something that I probably do need the biggest improvement on because I know it and I should be doing it and I know to do it. But I think I need to set a better example of intentionally using their name. I'll use their name, but intentionally using their name. Hey, Steve, George, Greg, Rick, Bob, Tim, Mandy, whatever the case is, using their name with more intentionality, I think is something that I would say I need to improve on myself. Because what's a person's favorite name? Word, their name. They love it. And it's that personal connection that I feel gets built up on that. But that's an instructor evaluation in a nutshell. And we do that keeping the instructors, making sure that we're all still growing, because not just knowing the techniques, but how to present it and teach someone else is part of continued education. We have a whole manual that I pulled up just in case, to reference any of the acronyms and things we had of all those techniques that we use to teach and the purpose behind them and the reason why. I would say the one thing I might add on here for future evaluations is classroom management. How well you managed the class. Were students engaged? Did you manage if they were getting a little too goofy or things like that? As we have new instructors and things coming up, I noticed that's a big thing that you and I, as we've done it so long, just kind of came naturally, and we just kind of did it.
Yeah, I think my classroom management is pretty good. The one thing I'll notice is I can lose my train of thought if I'm not careful. If a student is acting up, I tend to my brain focuses too much on that, and I lose whatever I'm teaching. So I've got to be better about addressing the problem quicker, or counting on the assistants too, so I can keep teaching and not get distracted. Because I'll get distracted sometimes if like a student keeps talking during a warm-up or something. So I got to get better at ignoring that, or putting a stop to it.
Yes, when it's appropriate to ignore, and just know that they're just wanting you to acknowledge them, and if you just don't, they stop on their own, versus I need to stop it and move on real quick and let that know, like, I can't let you disrupt the flow of my class. Mm-hmm. I'm the one in charge here, and so we need to keep going on that. So I think that kind of a classroom management is kind of a big thing that will probably get added in to future evaluations. How well are you managing the class, the expectations? And I think that is where the student experience came from, but I still like the idea of kind of, let the students give feedback. There might have been something that I missed that a student saw, like, I was trying to ask this question and no one ever came around and got it to me. Well, did you raise your hand? Well, I kind of put my hand up, but I don't know if anyone saw. Okay, well then we need to be more diligent, or we need to teach our students it's okay to really exaggerate, like, hey, I got a question, without disrupting the class.
Thinking like through the student's lens is one of, I think, the big things driving my teaching, and I think where a lot of my success has come from is everything I do, I try to view it through the lens of a student. And as a younger instructor, I was more recently a kid. I remember growing up in martial arts and kind of my perspective on classes. I'm trying to imagine if I were in this class right now, would I be enjoying what we're doing? Would I be learning? So it's kind of like there's two Joshuas out there. There's me teaching, and then there's the one in the class. And I'm trying to make sure I keep, both viewpoints whenever teaching.
I think that's good, and I don't want you to lose sight of that, because I didn't focus on that. And the other instructor, Dan, actually asked me this the other day. He said, did we act like that? I can't remember if I struggled that much when I was learning. Deb has said the same thing. She said, I can't remember she says, I know I struggled with things, but I don't know if it was
I think it's funny because I tend to think I struggled more than I actually did, because I was always decent, at least average, if not good, at martial arts growing up. But I always look back and feel like I was worse than I actually was, which is just funny because you say you aren't sure if you struggled that much, and I think whenever I look at a student, I just assume that I struggled the same amount as they did, which is why maybe I'm more patient with them. You're also very patient, not to say you're not. I've learned that from you as well. But just being like, it'll come with time.
Well, and I think that there are points where I don't think maybe I struggled with some of the motion, but I don't think I ever thought of myself as like the best martial artist in the class. Mm-hmm. Like I was always like, man, I'm not that good. I wish I was as good as that person or that person or that person. And I never viewed myself as like, oh, I'm like one of the top tier. But I'd be interested to go back to some of my previous instructors and say, when I was younger, where was I at? Was I the average student? Was I the below? Was I like the top tier in your mind? Because I never viewed myself that way. So I'd be interested to know, because a lot of students, even nowadays, we would be like, oh yeah, that kid, they're top tier, and they might be like, I am? Really? I always thought that I was doing kind of bad because so and so landed a hit on me. And then I'd be like, yeah, but so and so landed 20 hits on that person. They landed one on you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so keeping that kind of, and I think that's good. That's being humble. That's not getting a big over bloated head, because I think most of the students that do kind of get a little big for their britches, I would say, are not the top tier. Mm-hmm. And it's because of that reason is usually what it is. And so I think it's good to also do instructor evaluations with each other to keep us humble and let us know that, yeah, even though we're teaching, we still have things to learn. We still have things to improve on. We're not, the best at everything. No, there's lots of growth always growth moments on everything we do.
Well, great. I'm glad we got to do this. Good to revisit this, keep some things in mind as I go into teaching classes later today. And yeah, I think it's big. Wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, you can self-evaluate, have someone else evaluate you. That's why we do tests for the students. But hopefully, if you are a student and you heard this, it gives you some perspective of all the work that we put into teaching. If you're a fellow teacher that, maybe you can relate to this or even be encouraged to keep building up your teaching skills. Or if you're interested in martial arts, realize that, there's a lot to a good class. And when you're looking to start, find a teacher who's, dedicated to making your training as great as I think we try to do every day.
Right. And then really emphasize that they're not just great martial artists, they're great teachers as well, because it is a fine balance. But until next time, just keep on kicking
for a living.